class, Prof here. This week we're going to talk about when to speak up and when to rise up. So what does that have to do with difficult conversations? Well, let's just dive in today. Anytime you have a difficult conversation, it's important for us before we go into that difficult conversation. I've talked about this before on the podcast. We've got to put distance between our emotion, whatever that emotion is, and the response. Anytime you're getting ready to go into a difficult conversation, it's important for you, number one, to ask yourself the question, is this a conversation that I really should be happening? That I really should be having? Or is this a conversation that really should be happening? And so the book talks about this on page 133, and it talks about the kind of conversations that you need to have, right, with yourself before you go into a conversation with someone else. And so some of the questions it asks is that you need to ask yourself, is the real conflict inside of you? Oftentimes when we go into a difficult conversation, if we're not careful, really the issue is us and has nothing to do with the other person. And so what we might be doing is trying to take whatever it is inside of us that we haven't worked out, a conflict inside of us that we haven't worked out, and we're almost trying to project that onto something else or project that onto another relationship, and we got to be careful with that. Another question you might want to ask, is there a better way to address the issue than talking about it? Okay. Maybe there are other things that we can do. Okay. Maybe it's not a conversation. Maybe it's as the book talks about, maybe it's a change in your own behavior, something that you could do different, that could change the outcome of that. Okay. So maybe it's not the conversation. You can just say, hey, you know what? I need to do this better. I need to change this up. I need to change out how I'm seeing this. Right. And then it talks about, do you have purposes that make sense? Right. And so when you're going into a conversation, does the purpose of that conversation make sense? And it talks about, remember, you can't change other people. I love this one right here. Don't focus on short-term relief at long-term cost. If we're not careful, we go into a difficult conversation and we're thinking short-term, I need to fix this problem now. And we don't recognize that there's something bigger out there, and there could be a long-term cost that we're not seeing because we need to get this off of we need to get this idea out of our head right now. And so that's one that we need to be very, very careful with. Is this conversation going to lead to good long-term consequences? Or, as I've talked about this before, there's no such thing as bad choices or good choices, but there are consequences. And so maybe what you ask is, if I have this difficult conversation, am I okay with the long-term consequences of this conversation? Okay. That one's really important. And a lot of people don't think far enough ahead about that. The next one here says, don't hit and run, right? Often when we have something important to say, we say it now because now is when it's causing us frustration. Most of us are thoughtful enough to avoid the most egregious areas of bad timing. If someone tells us they've returned from the doctor's office and are going to have that operation after all, few of us will say, I'm sorry to hear about that. Oh, by the way, you still owe me $500, right? So that's kind of the hit and run conversation. I'm feeling it right now, so I'm going to say it right now. I've actually heard of somebody doing this, actually quite close to that. It was a friend of mine who worked for a very successful person. He actually did security for this very successful person, and this very successful person was just very driven. They were always thinking about the organization, the product, the service. That's why they were so successful. So my friend who was working for him, his mother had just passed away, and he goes to pick up this successful person, but they had their wires crossed. So the successful person is sitting on a curb waiting over here when my friend is he's in a different area, waiting to pick him up. And so by the time they figure out where they are, and the guy pulls around, he was able to pick him up, and then the guy was just upset. Okay. And so they didn't talk in the car. And so it was later, actually. So his mother had not died at that point, but later on, maybe a week later, between the time that that little incident happened, which is not a really, it's not a big deal for most people, but it was in this one. So between that happening and then the conversation about that situation that happened, my friend's mother had passed away. And so my friend goes to see this very successful person. And in the conversation, he's talking about the fact that his mother passed away and the arrangements and all this kind of stuff. And right before he leaves, he gets up to leave, and he just had told this successful person, his boss, about his mother dying. And right before he gets up to leave, the boss says, "Hey, remember when you left me sitting on that corner, last week? Don't ever let that happen again." Can you believe that? That still stays in my mind. And I think when my friend told me about this, it was 3 or 4 years earlier when that had happened. And so this had stayed with him for 3 to 5 years. And it's probably, I could call him up today and he could pull that memory up right away. It's a core memory now. That's not what we want to do. That's not the time to have to do. If the very successful person who has a name, I'm just using that. But if he just hold off on that, right? Maybe the next time they're making arrangements, put a note and say, "Hey, I don't want to be left sitting at the corner again. So how do we make sure that doesn't happen?" Save that for another conversation. I mean, I think it's a little bit weird that we'd have that conversation anyway. It was just an honest mistake. But if you're going to have it, save it for later. That's one of those hit and run. And it deeply impacted my friend, who then saw this person differently. Why? Because he's telling him about his mother that passed away, and all he's thinking about is, "You left me sitting on the corner." That's not what we do. Okay. So these are things we have to understand. You've got to understand when to speak up. And sometimes it's not right to have the conversation because you don't need to have the conversation. Then we need to figure out when to rise up. And this is what chapter 8 talks about. Okay. When to rise up. And here's what I mean by that. It talks in here about a third story, that in any situation, you've probably heard this before, there's three different sides of this, of the story. There's your side, the other person's side, and then there's the actual truth. There's what, if someone could step in objectively and look at the situation, they would see the actual truth. I want to encourage you to think objectively about the next difficult conversation you have. And one of the notes I made here is systems thinking. Anytime we're systems thinkers, we rise above the situation. We look down upon it, almost like we're in a helicopter, and we're looking down on it, so we can see the entire landscape. Okay, and I've taught this in classes before. I think it's a really important mental model to have, this idea of systems thinking. Anytime you're getting ready to make a decision, rise up to the 30,000-foot view level and get a scope of everything. Right. And especially with the difficult conversation, it's really important because, again, we see things from our own perspectives. We see things from our own eyes. Just yesterday, as I'm recording this, our family did a beach day. And so we're driving into the beach, and I know how this beach gets. The parking can be insane. And so it's right here in San Diego. It's up here in it's right down the street from Solana. I'm not going to tell you where my beach is. I don't want to be showing up there. So anyway, it's the beach where we go to. And so we're pulling off the freeway there that pulls you into the parking lot. And there are cars coming and there are bikes coming. Well, there's a break in the cars, but the bikes keep coming. Okay. And it's kind of annoying to me that these bikes won't slow down and let all the traffic in. And so I don't know what I was thinking. There's a sheriff sitting here pulling out, getting ready to go this way. There's bikes coming this way, but I've got a window of opportunity here, and I take it. And and I'm going so fast that I've got a Suburban, and the Suburban, you can hear the wheels like spinning out, and it makes a sound like that. I'm right in front of the sheriff. I don't know anything. Well, the bikers, they're not happy about this at all. And I look in my rearview mirror, and they're, doing this, and they're looking at the sheriff, "What? Come on, did you see that?" So she flips her lights on, she pulls around, and she didn't even give me a warning. She just said, "Hey, man, it's busy today. Knock it off. Don't ever do stupid stuff like that again." And she was right. I'm pulling in though, and I'm frustrated with these bikers. And when I say bike, I don't mean motorcyclists, I mean bicyclists, right? So my perspective is, right, I'm just trying to get in here and get parked so I can spend the next 45 minutes trying to find a parking space because I know how this beach works. Their perspective is we're out here rolling around and we're bicyclists, and so we get the right of way, right? so much entitlement with some of these bicyclists out here. Maybe some of you feel the same way, but if you're a bicyclist, my apologies. I shouldn't be saying this right now. But the third person who was able to step in was the police officer. Okay, that's the third part of the story. From her perspective, it's like, yeah, bikes, you see these cars coming. Why can't you slow down a little bit? Right? You had enough space, he had enough space. You could have slowed down a little bit and waved them in, right? But from my perspective, she's also thinking, why in the world would you do that? Spin out your wheels right in front of me and then potentially risk hitting one of these bicyclists, right? So my perspective is this. Their perspective is like, that stupid guy in that vehicle, he's gonna. But the third story was the officer, and she was very cool. I mean, really, I really felt bad after that, because I thought, she was so nice about it. I actually felt bad about my actions. So I'm using the story. She had the third story. This is where we all need to be when we're having a situation. Because if you would have had me talk to the bicyclist, I guarantee you I'm coming at it from a heated perspective. They're coming at it from a heated perspective. We're upset. Why are you getting me pulled over? Why are you tattletelling on me? That's mine. From them, it's like, you're not putting safety first. You could have ran me over and whatever. So the sheriff was able to step in, and it was just me and the sheriff, whatever, and right there in front of my whole family. And she was very cool about it. That's the third story. That's where we need to get to. Okay. So again, it's really important for us to understand, do we speak up about the issue? Okay, that's number one. Is this something I need, or is it my issue? And number two is, before I speak up about the issue, how do I raise up to the 30,000-foot view level and look at this almost like the sheriff did, right? From their perspective, from his perspective, and then what's the truth here? And the truth was that they should have slowed down. I certainly should not have pulled out in front of them like that, right? So we all were in the wrong, right? With that, we all could have done better in terms of our choices. That's the third story, okay? So here's what I want to ask you to write about. I want you to think about an upcoming difficult conversation that you have to have, okay? And then I want you to break down what we just talked about, okay? So number one is this. Is it your issue, okay? And have you thought about it? And what part of the issue is yours? Have you thought about that first? Is this a conversation that you're going to have that needs to happen, or is it your own issue? And again, if you got the book, then you can look inside for the questions. Is the real conflict inside of you? Is there a better way to address the issue than talking about it, right? Are you focusing on the short term at the risk of the long term? So I want you to think about that, okay? Are you doing a hit and run? And then number two, I want you to think, how do I see this from a systems perspective? And just kind of write just a few sentences about each of those. Okay, so that's for an upcoming one. Now, if you say, well, I don't have any upcoming difficult conversations, great. I want you to think about a past difficult conversation. Is it a conversation that should have been had, or based on what we just read about, was the real conflict inside of you? Okay, is there a better way to address the issue than talking about it, or was there a better way? Did you hit and run? Did you think about short term versus long term? Is there something you would have done better with that conflict? And so I want you to think about that. For any of you who are in marriages, partnerships, you've got relationships, right? You know that there are times that it's just better not to say anything. It really is, right? Now, I'm not saying that we need to keep quiet all the time. We definitely need to talk about our conflict. We need to get that out there. But there are sometimes we just need to just let it go, because the issue is me, it's not the other person, okay? And then also be thinking about it from that, so again, it's, the second part is the systems perspective, right? The first part, did the conversation need to happen? The second part, from a systems perspective, okay? So a conversation that you once had, or maybe you used, or that you did have at one point, a difficult conversation. If you look at it from a systems perspective, does that conversation that you had still make sense? Okay. So that's your assignment. Again, look back at a past conversation, maybe one that I could have done that better. And then again, just talk through that, right? Was the conflict you or them? Is there a better way to address it? Did you hit and run? Did you think about short term or long term? And then from a systems perspective, should that conversation have happened? Did you really see all sides? And if you have one coming up, then I want you to think about it from the same perspective. Thanks so much for listening. I hope this is adding value to you and to your journey. I look forward to your responses. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.